May 7th, 2021. 5:30 inches the morning. Inside the Master Control Center of Colonial Pipeline in Alpharetta, Georgia, the hum of the servers usually sounds like a heartbeat. But on this morning, the heartbeat stopped. The screens didn't flicker. They didn't explode. They simply froze. A single text file appeared on the monitors of the largest fuel pipeline system in the United States. It wasn't a system error. It was a ransom note. Within hours, the panic didn't just stay on a secure server. It spilled out into the physical world. 5,500 miles of steel pipe at the jugular vein of the American East Coast was severed instantly. From the refineries of Texas to the harbors of New York, the fuel stopped flowing. You remember the images. Cars lining up for miles, wrapping around city blocks. Fistfights breaking out at pump stations over the last few drops of gasoline. Plastic bags being filled with fuel by desperate citizens. The president was briefed in the Situation Room. The FBI scrambled their elite cyber units. The world held its breath, wondering if this was the opening shot of a cyber war. Was it a foreign state? Was it sabotage? But the truth was far more terrifying and far more humiliating. This wasn't a sophisticated military operation. This wasn't a team of spies rappelling down an elevator shaft. The chaos that brought a superpower to its knees began with something incredibly small. One forgotten employee account, one single password, floating in the dark corners of the internet. How did a string of characters turn into a national emergency? And who was holding the keys? To understand how a superpower was paralyzed, we have to look away from the gas pumps of Virginia and peer into the shadows of the Russian-speaking internet. We need to talk about DarkSide. Forget the Hollywood image of a lonely hacker in a dark basement, typing furiously against a green screen. That is a relic of the past. DarkSide wasn't just a gang, it was a corporation. They operated with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. They had a PR department to talk to journalists. They had a customer service help desk that operated 24/7 to help victims buy Bitcoin. They even had a code of ethics, promising not to attack hospitals or funeral homes. They treated cyber extortion not as a crime, but as a legitimate business transaction. They pioneered a model called ransomware as a service. Think of it like a fast food franchise. DarkSide developers built the digital weapon, the encryption software, and then rented it out to affiliates. Any criminal with a little bit of ambition could borrow the weapon, carry out the attack, and split the profits. It democratized destruction. You didn't need to be a genius coder to hold a company hostage. You just needed to be a partner. And on the other side of this digital battlefield sat Colonial Pipeline, a titan of the old world, a company dealing in steel, pressure, and fluid dynamics. For decades, their security meant tall fences, armed guards, and surveillance cameras. They were experts at protecting the physical pipes. But in 2021, the walls that matter aren't made of concrete. They are made of code. Somewhere in the vast, complex IT infrastructure of Colonial Pipeline, there was a ghost. A single, legacy virtual private network or VPN profile. This account belonged to an employee who no longer needed it. It should have been deleted. It should have been deactivated. But it sat there, dormant. A forgotten door left slightly ajar. Worse, this door didn't have a deadbolt. Most modern secure systems require multi-factor authentication, that second step where you get a code on your phone. This account did not. It only needed a password. Just one string of characters stood between the criminals and the control room of America's energy infrastructure. The tragedy is that the hackers didn't even have to hack in the traditional sense. They didn't smash the door down. They simply found the key under the doormat. The password for this account had likely been exposed in a completely unrelated data breach years earlier, on a different website, by a different user. It ended up in a massive database of stolen credentials on the dark web, sold for perhaps a few dollars. A multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, a sophisticated criminal syndicate, and the bridge between them was a recycled password that someone, somewhere, was too careless to change. The stage was set, the weapon was loaded, and the affiliates of DarkSide were about to walk right through the front door. 7 a.m. The sun was rising over Georgia, but inside Colonial Pipeline HQ, the world had gone dark. The realization hit the IT security team like a physical blow. This wasn't a glitch. A jagged, red skull flashed on the monitors. A text file named README 4 decrypt text sat on every infected desktop. The message was polite, professional, and chilling. Welcome to DarkSide. We have encrypted your files. To get your data back, you must pay. The ransom? 75 Bitcoin, roughly $4.4 million. But money wasn't the immediate problem. The problem was the blind spot. The malware had infected the IT network, the billing systems, the email servers, the administrative brain of the company. But what about the nervous system? What about the operational technology, OT, that controlled the pressure valves, the pumps, and the flow of millions of gallons of highly flammable liquid moving at high speed beneath American soil? If the hackers had crossed that bridge, if they could control the valves, they could cause leaks, explosions, environmental catastrophes. CEO Joseph Blount faced a nightmare scenario. He had no way of knowing how deep the infection went. The monitoring systems were down. He was flying a jumbo jet blindfolded. In a room thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee, he made the most difficult decision of his career. He didn't wait for the hackers to shut down the pipeline. He ordered his team to do it themselves. Shut it down. All of it. For the first time in its 57-year history, the main arteries of Colonial Pipeline were manually severed. The flow stopped. By the afternoon of May 8th, the FBI was on the scene. Specialized agents and windbreakers moved through the corridors, seizing hard drives and plugging in forensic tools. But in a ransomware attack, the investigation is a slow, agonizing crawl. It's a crime scene where the fingerprints are digital and the perpetrators are ghosts. The agents confirmed the worst. It was DarkSide, Russian-based, ruthless. But the FBI's advice was standard protocol. Do not pay. If you pay, you fund terror. If you pay, you invite them back. Easy to say. Hard to do when the east coast of the United States is running out of fuel. By May 9th, the panic had left the boardroom and hit the streets. News broke that the pumps were running dry. Social media fueled the fire. Number gas shortage trended instantly. In North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia, panic buying began. People filled Tupperware containers, trash bags, and water bottles with gasoline. Fights broke out at stations. The price of fuel spiked. Back in the war room, the pressure was crushing. The company's backups were there. Yes, but they were massive. Restoring the system from backups would take days, maybe weeks. The country didn't have weeks. Every hour the pipeline stayed off, the chaos outside multiplied. The hackers opened a chat window, a literal customer support chat. They were calm. They asked if the company wanted a test decryption to prove they were legitimate. It was surreal. They were treating the paralysis of American infrastructure like a software troubleshooting ticket. Joseph Blount looked at the screens. He looked at the reports of hoarding and panic outside. He looked at the FBI agents who could offer justice later, but no solution now. He had a $4.4 million gun pointed at his head, and the trigger was a decryptor key. The backups were too slow. The government couldn't help fast enough. The clock was ticking, and the noise of the crisis was deafening. The silence in the room was heavier than the noise outside. He had to make the call that no one wants to make. He had to negotiate with terrorists. The decision was made. The authorization was signed. In a matter of seconds, 75 coins of digital gold, $4 million moved from a corporate account into the anonymous fog of the blockchain. It was a humiliating moment. A capitulation. One of America's most critical infrastructure companies had just paid a ransom to a criminal syndicate just to turn the lights back on. DarkSide kept their word, technically. Moments after the Bitcoin transfer was confirmed, the decryption tool appeared. The IT team scrambled to deploy it, hoping for a miracle, hoping the screens would blink back to life instantly. But there was a cruel twist. The decryption tool was a disaster. It was poorly coded, single-threaded, and agonizingly slow. It crawled through the terabytes of data like a snail. The engineers watched the progress bar barely move. They realized with horror that the $4.4 million key was practically useless. It was faster to keep restoring from the manual backups than to use the hacker's tool. They had paid the ransom for a lifeboat that was full of holes. It took 5 long days to restart the pipeline, 5 days of panic buying, 5 days of political firestorms. When the fuel finally began to flow again, reaching the pumps at 5 miles per hour, the crisis on the streets began to fade. But behind the scenes, the war was far from over. Usually, this is where the story ends. The hackers vanish with the money. The company licks its wounds. The insurance pays out, but not this time. While DarkSide was celebrating their payday, they made a fatal assumption. They believed that Bitcoin was untraceable. They believed they were ghosts. But they forgot that the blockchain is a public ledger. It is a book that anyone can read, if they know how to look. And watching that ledger, tracking every hop, every split, and every transfer, were the eyes of the Department of Justice. The FBI had been following the money from the moment it left Colonial's wallet. They didn't just watch, they hunted. They traced the funds through a maze of digital transactions, waiting for the criminals to make a mistake. And they did. The funds landed in a specific wallet hosted on a server in Northern California. On June 7th, 1 month after the attack, the Deputy Attorney General stepped up to a podium. The world expected a standard update on the investigation. Instead, they got a bombshell. The FBI hadn't just identified the wallet. They had obtained the private key. In a move that shocked the cybersecurity world, the US government had hacked the hackers. They digitally reached into the wallet of the DarkSide group and seized 63.7 bitcoins, recovering over $2 million of the ransom. It was the first time in history the US government had successfully clawed back a ransomware payment of this magnitude. The message was clear. The verdict wasn't delivered by a judge with a gavel. It was delivered by a cyber unit with a command line. It shattered the illusion of invincibility for ransomware gangs. Their funds were frozen. They claimed they were shutting down due to pressure from the US. The criminals didn't go to prison, but they lost the one thing they cared about: the profit. The gas pumps are full again. The panic lines have disappeared. The Colonial Pipeline is flowing at full capacity, feeding the engines of the East Coast as if nothing ever happened. But everything has changed. In the wake of the attack, Joseph Blount was dragged before the United States Congress. He sat in the hot seat, explaining to angry senators how a multi-billion-dollar energy giant was brought down by a single compromised password. It was a wake-up call that rang out from Washington to Silicon Valley. President Biden signed a sweeping executive order to modernize the nation's cybersecurity defenses. Multi-factor authentication was no longer an option. It became a mandate. The era of security through obscurity was officially over. DarkSide may have dissolved, but like a hydra, when one head is cut off, 2 more grow in its place. The affiliates simply rebranded. They moved to new groups like Black Matter and Revil, continuing their digital extortion with even more sophistication. The ransomware industry didn't die. It just evolved. The Colonial Pipeline hack wasn't just a crime. It was a revelation. It showed us exactly how fragile our modern world really is. We live in a society built on invisible pillars of code. Our water, our electricity, our hospitals, and our fuel, they all depend on networks that are only as strong as their weakest link. We build higher fences, stronger firewalls, and more complex encryption. But at the end of the day, the safety of an entire nation can rest in the hands of a single employee. Tired after a long shift, reusing a password they made 5 years ago. The pipes are buried deep underground, protected by steel and concrete. But the keys to those pipes are floating in the cloud, vulnerable to anyone with enough patience to find them. The attack on Colonial Pipeline proved that in the 21st century, you don't need bombs to destroy a country. You just need to find the one door they forgot to lock. We are all connected. We are all vulnerable. And somewhere in the dark, the next group is already scanning, looking for that one forgotten account. The question isn't if it will happen again. The question is, when the screen goes black next time, will we be able to turn it back on?